It is finally time for me to give you guys my favourite films of 2019, and I'm sorry this video is a little bit late. There are a couple of late releases in early January that I wanted to see before doing this video. There are some more late releases towards the end of January like Lighthouse, Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood and Uncut Gems. And I just don't want to wait too long to make this video because the longer I delay it, the less people will care. Usual disclaimers, this is my list, not yours. If you're just going to complain that your favourite films aren't on here or they're not in the right order that you think they should be in, go away, I don't want anything to do with you. But for everybody else, welcome one and all. And I just want to say real quick before I get into the list, 2019 was a really damn good year for films. Seriously, there were so many times this year where I walked out of the cinema just really happy that I saw a really fun or quite a few times a great film. In fact, the honourable mentions list has a lot of films that I really enjoyed and some that I struggled not putting in my top 10 list, and even there are some films that didn't make the honourable mentions, like 4 out of 5 films that I still really enjoyed. That's how good of a year it was. So yeah, let's just get into some goodness and let's get into the honourable mentions, films that just didn't make my top 10. So my honourable mentions for 2019 are El Camino, Fighting with My Family, Rocket Man, John Wick Chapter 3, Doctor Sleep, Spider-Man Far From Home, Little Women, Booksmart, Ad Astra, and Marriage Story. So my honourable mentions have been mentioned. Let's get into my top 10 favourite films of 2019. Kicking off at number 10 is, in my opinion, the most overlooked and underrated film of 2019. Way more people should have watched this film than actually did. Blinded by the Light. To use a critic quote, this is the feel-good film of the year. It is a great story of a guy learning how to express himself and finding out who he really is through the power of Bruce Springsteen music. And the film itself is a great tribute to the power of music, how music can inspire us, how music can shape us, how we can connect to song lyrics like the main character does. And the soundtrack is awesome. Bruce Springsteen, I've had Bruce Springsteen playing quite a bit on Spotify as a result of this film. And it's just also a really emotional story of a guy learning to accept his family at the same time. It is heartwarming, it is touching, it is moving, it is inspiring, it is feel good. If you haven't watched Blinded by the Light yet, I implore you, please watch it because it is completely worth your time. It is a bit cheesy at times, but like I said in my video, it just tackles the cheesy elements with such confidence and exuberance. You can't help but just smile. Coming in at number 9 is one of the 2 films that I delayed this video for. In fact, I just saw this film yesterday, 1917. Wow, what an experience this film was. The one-shot style of it just makes it so immersive and so intense and so riveting, and because you're constantly following these soldiers and it never cuts away from them, you really feel like you're with them on the battlefield experiencing these horrors of war together. And you say that about a lot of films, like I've said that about a lot of films where you feel like you're there with the characters, but with this film you really do because you feel like you're walking next to them, and it's just such a riveting and visceral experience. The action sequences were loud and sometimes quite hard hitting, and the way it explores the casualties and the horrors of war was sometimes quite shocking and really effective. And this combined with Sam Mendes' incredible direction, the phenomenal cinematography and the incredible sound design and sound editing makes this one of the most impressive war films of this past decade. Number 8 is the other film that I delayed doing this video for, Jojo Rabbit. Before Jojo Rabbit, everybody knew that Taika Waititi was great at the irreverent, quirky humour. We saw that with Hunt for the Wilder People and Thor Ragnarok. But this film showed me that Taika Waititi can be very effective at giving you the emotion. And this film, I'm going to remember one scene in this film, especially the scene with the shoes. Everybody talked about that before the film came out, and when that scene happened, I'm just like, oh. Like, the film went from a quirky, satirical kind of film to a, oh my god, this is actually getting really emotional now. And the way Taika Waititi balances the humour, the irreverence with the heartfelt emotion, for me, completely worked. I know some people have said that it felt kind of jarring, and that's the thing with these kinds of films that tackle themes like this. Films like The Help and Green Book, where it tackles heavy themes but in a light-hearted kind of way. Some people don't really get as on board with them. Me personally, I do, because tackling themes in this way makes them more digestible, at least when they're done right. Sometimes it can be a complete disaster. And Taika Waititi managed to find the Goldilocks zone in balancing both tones and both feels very effectively. Everybody was on their A game in the cast. Rowan Griffin Davis and Tomsy McKenzie, great chemistry. I want to see more of Tomsy McKenzie. and I think this is quite possibly Taika Waititi's best film, I think. Speaking of emotionally effective, coming at number 7 is Toy Story 4. I wasn't as cynical about this film as a lot of people were going into it, but there still was that question mark, because Toy Story 3 was a perfect conclusion, so Toy Story 4, do you want to risk compromising that ending? I, for one, am very glad they made Toy Story 4. The overarching story of Woody and how it brings his story to a conclusion, for me, was extremely satisfying. Toy Story 3 was the end of Andy's story, Toy Story 4 was the end of Woody's story, and Woody being the main character of the franchise and them concluding his story in such an emotionally effective way, for me, made Toy Story 4 a worthwhile entry into this franchise. And I'm also just staggered how they managed to keep the franchise this consistently great with 4 films. And Toy Story went from being one of the best trilogies of all time to quite possibly the best quadrilogy of all time. Number 6 is a film that's on everybody else's top 10 list, The Irishman. Now, I rewatched this film the other day for the first time on Netflix. I watched it in early November in the cinema, rewatched it on Netflix finally, and I was once again just staggered by this film. The 3.5 hours flew by for me, and it's just the fact that Martin Scorsese did a film like this, looking at organised crime and a gangster life, but taking a contemplative approach to it and exploring the main character's feelings and reflecting on the decisions of his life. And it was a poignant film, if I'm saying that word right, poignant, whatever. But it was a really sad film towards the end, and it's just the themes that it touches of sadness and regret and morality was just so different for a film like this. And I think it's, again, Martin Scorsese's most thoughtful film, and it's definitely the most emotionally resonant gangster film that I've ever seen. That last half an hour, some of the best filmmaking, best directing, and some of the best acting of 2019. Number 5 might just be the best murder mystery film that I've ever seen, Knives Out. Rian Johnson gets a great ensemble cast for a really interesting, very engaging murder mystery. That's all I can ask for with a murder mystery is the mystery interesting and engaging, and this was. But I was really surprised with the approach that they took with telling this story from a different perspective, and I'm still not going to spoil it in case you haven't watched it, which you should. But I was just really impressed with the story, the twists and turns along the way. All the performances were on point. Daniel Craig was awesome. Ana de Armas is now on my radar. Toni Collette as, oh my god, you're like so famous. I love that voice. It's just, I love the voice of her in this film as a piss take of people who do that voice. I hate that voice usually, but Toni Collette knocked it out of the park, as did everybody, as did Rian Johnson, as did the film. Coming in at number 4 is Ford v Ferrari. I just love dramas set in a sports environment where people are fighting the odds and just trying to achieve a goal. And films like that in general, not just sports dramas, but this film ticked all the boxes that it was trying to tick. A great chemistry and friendship between Christian Bale and Matt Damon, a great story of an unlikely friendship, and just also a great story of two people fighting the corporate man and trying to just do the thing they love to do. They're trying to build the awesome car, the ultimate car, and win the championship. And it was just an exhilarating ride. I still remember the cinema experience where it was, the volume was so loud, and every time a car just roared past the screen, the seats would vibrate. I was just so into it. It was an adrenaline ride. Probably the best racing film that I've ever seen, which hasn't really been a lot that I've seen, but at least this is now the standard of racing films going forward for me. Number 3, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. This is a film that just gets better and better the more I think about it, and the second time I saw it in the cinema, I enjoyed it much more because I just sat back and enjoyed it and appreciated it for what it was, which is a hangout movie. And 2019 has really been the year where I've become quite a fan of hangout movies because I watched The Big Lebowski for the first time, Dazed and Confused for the first time, and I'm just all for the concept of just hanging out with characters on screen for however long the film's on for. And in this film's case, it's 2 hours and 45 minutes of hanging out with Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton and Sharon Tate in 1960s Hollywood. Hell yes. Seeing Rick Dalton on the set, trying to become the great actor that he wants to be, Cliff Booth doing his thing with the weird Manson people. It was just a really chill, really relaxed, and incredibly well-made film. The recreation of the 1960s was awesome. This film probably did the best job of making me feel like I was in a time period of 2019. And that finale as well, just one of the best things I've seen all year. Is there a more satisfying hit in a film in 2019 than the dog food can to the face? I don't think so. I've been struggling with the top 2 for a couple months now, switching them back and forth so many times, but I've come to a decision which might surprise you. Coming in at number 2, Avengers Endgame. I absolutely, unabashedly love Avengers Endgame. This film is cinema. Don't care what Martin Scorsese says. This is everything that I love about films. Being invested in a world and characters for so many years. And this is why I love franchise films and the concept of shared universes, because what started all the way back in 2008 finally wrapped up in 2019 in such an epic, ridiculously exciting, and incredibly emotionally satisfying way. The thing is, I'm not going to talk about Scorsese's comments too much because the dude's entitled to his opinions or whatever, but the reason why it irked me a little bit was because of how much emotional weight this film has. Tony Stark on the ship at the beginning, and then you have Black Widow talking with Cap at the Avengers HQ, Scott Lang reuniting with Cassie, and of course the entire last 10 minutes. I was tearing up big time at a Marvel film, a big franchise tentpole Marvel film, and I was tearing up because I was so emotionally invested in what was going on. It's one of the landmarks now for me in terms of big budget blockbuster entertainment. This is the proof that all superhero films and all big budget blockbuster tentpole films aren't just visual noise and no heart, no soul that people like to throw at these kind of films. This is proof that that's not always the case, that people actually put heart and soul and effort into these things, and Marvel did something so unprecedented with this thing, again concluding that 11 years, 22 film arc in such an amazingly satisfying way. The first time I watched Endgame, my initial watch of it, best cinema experience of the entire year and one of the best cinema experiences of my entire life. So yeah, Endgame comes in my number 2, but not quite. It was my number 1 for a while, but I've decided to go with a different film for number 1, so let's just get to it. My number 1 favourite film of 2019, Joker. This film riveted me to the core. I don't think I saw a more riveting film in 2019 than this one. And what this film does for the comic book genre is why I think I put this film above Endgame, because Endgame, as much as I love it and it has all the emotional weight like I just said, it still is a spectacle film that people kind of expect from a superhero film. But this film brings the genre way down to earth in the best way possible, and I think this film can show the naysayers what can be done with this genre. And in Joker's case, it is a dark, complex, gritty, and again riveting psychological thriller. Seeing Arthur Fleck just crumble and crumble and crumble under the harsh society, and just seeing him lose his mind throughout the entire film, and eventually just gets to that breaking point where he starts to embrace the chaos. It was, like I said in my video, it was a really effective tragedy of a guy who doesn't want to be a bad person but just has some things wrong with him, just be disregarded so much by just a completely neglectful society to the point where he can't take it anymore. I felt bad for Arthur Fleck, but again, it doesn't condone Arthur Fleck. It doesn't say that what Arthur Fleck's doing and the path that he's taking is the right thing to do, kids. Just follow in Arthur Fleck's footsteps and start killing people. Don't do that. This is a cautionary tale if ever there was one, and one of the most effective ones that I've ever seen. Even just without the Joker part of it, it was still a really effective psychological thriller. But the fact that it is a Joker film and it is a comic book film just makes it all the more impressive that Warner Brothers actually had this film made, because nobody else would have made this film. Marvel wouldn't have made this film for one of their characters. So thank you, Warner Brothers, for giving us this film, and thank you for giving us an unforgettable entry into the comic book genre and one of the most incredible performances I've ever seen with Joaquin Phoenix, who should get the Oscar. Joker is my number 1 film of 2019. And there you have it, guys. Those are my top 10 favourite films of 2019. Again, it was an incredible year for films. Let's hope 2020 is just as good, maybe even better. One can hope. But thanks for watching as always. Let me know your top 10 favourite films of 2019 in the comments below. And if you want to see more of my stuff, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you when I see you.